The emergency doors exploded open and the hallway turned red. 14 crash victims. Screaming. Blood on the floor tiles. Blood on the walls. Blood soaking through white coats faster than anyone could press gauze to skin. Every doctor, every senior nurse, every tech in Silver Ridge Memorial's trauma bay was already running, already shouting, already drowning in controlled chaos. Nobody saw the man on the forgotten stretcher in the corner. Nobody except her. 23-year-old Kara Novak, third week on the job, still learning where they kept the extra IV bags, watched his chest rise once, then barely again, and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She crossed the room. He opened one eye, and in a voice barely above gravel, he said one word. Compromised. Before we go any further, if you're watching this story for the first time, hit follow right now so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go. Kara Novak had made exactly one enemy in her first 3 weeks at Harlan Ridge Memorial Hospital. And that enemy was Dr. Felix Drummond, Chief of Emergency Medicine, a man who wore his authority the way other people wore cologne, in quantities that made everyone around him slightly sick. She hadn't meant to make an enemy. She'd meant to do her job. The problem was that doing her job, as far as Drummond was concerned, meant staying quiet, restocking supply carts, taking vitals when asked, and under no circumstances offering a clinical opinion about anything to anyone. Kara had followed that unwritten rule for exactly 6 days before her mouth got ahead of her brain, and she told a third-year resident that the potassium drip on a 62-year-old cardiac patient was running too fast. The resident had ignored her. The patient had coded 40 minutes later. They'd stabilized him eventually. Nobody had said Kara's name afterward. Nobody thanked her. Nobody documented her concern, and when Drummond walked past her in the hallway the next morning, he looked through her like she was a window he didn't particularly want to see out of. That was week 1. Week 2, she'd flagged a medication discrepancy on a pediatric chart. Wrong weight recorded, wrong dosage calculated. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Patrice Holt, who had been working the ER floor since before Kara was born, had taken the chart from her hands without a word, corrected it without acknowledgement, and returned it to the rack. Later that afternoon, Patrice had told the other nurses, loudly enough for Kara to hear from the medication room, that new grads these days thought 3 weeks of clinicals made them physicians. Nobody disagreed. Week 3 began on a Tuesday in October with a temperature outside that couldn't decide if it wanted to be summer or fall, and Harlan Ridge sitting in that strange dry heat that came off the desert around Talcott, New Mexico, like the land itself was running a fever. The mass casualty call came in at 11:47 a.m. 18 vehicles. A semi had jackknifed across I-40 during a tire blowout, and the chain reaction behind it had turned 200 yards of interstate into a demolition yard. The first ambulances started arriving at 12:03. By 12:20, Silver Ridge Memorial's, Harlan Ridge Memorial's, trauma bay was beyond capacity, the overflow pushing into the main ER corridor, and Drummond was in his element, barking orders with the focused aggression of a man who'd spent his career building toward exactly this kind of moment. Kara worked triage support. That was her assignment. She wasn't to initiate anything, wasn't to make independent assessments, wasn't to touch a patient without direct instruction from a physician or senior nurse. She restocked, she assisted. She did what she was told, and she tried not to look like she was watching everything with more attention than anyone assumed she had. The trauma bay was loud in a way that had its own grammar. There was the high register noise of acute crisis, shouting, monitors alarming, the metallic clatter of instrument trays from, and underneath it, the lower register of sustained emergency, which was quieter and somehow worse. Drummond moved through the space like a conductor who'd memorized the score, directing residents and techs with short, precise commands. He was good at this, Kara had to admit. Whatever she thought of him personally, the man knew how to run a trauma. She was crossing from the supply alcove back toward the nurse's station when she saw him. He was on a stretcher that had been rolled against the far wall of the corridor. Not the trauma bay, not a treatment room, just the hallway, parked beside a defunct crash cart that hadn't been used in months. The stretcher had a yellow tag on the rail. Yellow was secondary priority. Delayed. Not immediately life-threatening. Kara almost kept walking. What stopped her was the color of his skin. Not pale. People in shock went pale. This man had gone a specific gray-white that she'd seen exactly once before on a patient during her clinical rotation who had been bleeding internally for 3 hours before anyone caught it. His lips had the same quality, not bloodless exactly. Wrong. She stopped. He was a big man, mid to late 30s, with the kind of build that suggested he hadn't arrived at it accidentally. His face was unmarked. No lacerations, no road rash, nothing that matched the injuries she'd expect from highway collision trauma. There was a bandage on his left forearm that looked fresh, applied too neatly for an ambulance crew working 20 other patients at the same time. His chest moved. Once. Then a pause that was 3 seconds too long. Then again. She moved to the stretcher. His eyes opened when she touched his wrist. Not both of them. His right eye opened about a third of the way. The left one didn't move, and she clocked that immediately. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice even. "Can you hear me?" His pulse under her fingers was there, but it was wrong. Weak and irregular in a pattern that didn't match simple blood pressure drop from blood loss. She picked up the chart clipped to the stretcher rail. The paramedic intake note said, MVC, restrained driver, mild thoracic contusion, left forearm laceration, sutured at scene, BP 108/74 on arrival, GCS 14. GCS 14 meant nearly normal neurological function. The man in front of her was nowhere near GCS 14. She looked at the laceration bandage again. The shape of it, the location. She'd done enough trauma clinicals to recognize the difference between a gash from broken glass and a wound that had been created by something narrow and deliberate. The bandage was hiding something that hadn't happened in a car crash. "Sir," she leaned closer. "I need you to tell me your name." He turned his head a fraction of an inch toward her. His right eye found her face. She could see the effort it cost him. His lips moved. She had to lean down to hear it. Compromised. She straightened up, took one breath. Then she walked, not ran, because running in a trauma hallway was how you caused a second emergency, walked with purpose toward the trauma bay entrance and looked until she found Dr. Alejandro Voss, one of the attendings who'd been rotating through the secondary cases. "Dr. Voss, I need you to look at a patient." Voss was signing off on a chart. He didn't look up. "Talk to the charge nurse." "I'm talking to you because I think this patient is crashing and he's been yellow tagged as secondary." That got his eyes up. He looked at her the way most of the physicians here looked at her, which was with the specific expression of someone deciding how much of their time this was worth. "Who tagged him?" "Paramedic intake, but his presentation doesn't match the chart. Pupils are unequal. I can see it without a light. His breathing pattern is abnormal. His skin color is wrong for simple thoracic contusion." Voss set the chart down slowly. "You're the new grad. Collins. No. Novak. Yes. What's your assessment?" She kept her voice steady. "I think he's bleeding somewhere the intake team didn't catch. I think his neurostatus is worse than the GCS says, and I think whoever applied that forearm dressing did it somewhere other than the accident scene." Voss stared at her for a moment. Then he walked toward the corridor. She followed. He stood over the stretcher for 6 seconds. She counted. He reached down and checked the pulse himself, lifted one eyelid, then the other, looked at the bandage. Then he turned around and walked back toward the trauma bay without saying a word to her. She stood in the corridor. He was going to do something. She could tell by the speed of his walk. She followed him back to the bay entrance and watched him pull Drummond aside, watched the two of them have a 30-second conversation that she couldn't hear over the noise. Drummond looked up, straight at her. His face did something complicated. Then he turned back to Voss and said something else, and Voss nodded, and Drummond walked toward the corridor. Kara moved aside to let him pass. He stopped next to her instead. "The patient in the hall," Drummond said, without preamble. "Your assessment. I think he needs imaging, head and abdominal. I think the forearm wound isn't consistent with the reported mechanism of injury, and I think—" "You think," Drummond said. "Yes. You've been a nurse for 3 weeks. 22 days, but the pupil asymmetry is objective. That's not interpretation." Drummond looked at her for a long moment. Not through her this time. At her. She couldn't tell if that was better or worse. "Stay here," he said. He went to the stretcher. She didn't stay. She walked close enough to watch without being in the way. Drummond's examination lasted 40 seconds. Then he straightened up, turned his head, and called into the bay. "Get me a crash team in the corridor, now, and somebody call radiology. I need emergency CT, head and abdomen. I want a slot in 5 minutes." The hallway shifted, nurses moved, a tech appeared with a crash cart. Drummond came back toward her. His voice dropped. "Go back to your station, Novak." "Is he going to—" "Go back to your station." She went. The next 90 minutes were the most professionally invisible she'd ever felt. The patient was moved to a treatment room. A trauma team assembled around him. She heard words filtering out through the door. Hematoma, penetrating, internal, words that told her she'd been right without telling her anything about what was actually happening to him. She restocked carts. She assisted with 2 minor lacerations on other patients. She did her job. Patrice Holt walked past her at 2:15 and said nothing. A second-year resident named Marcus Webb, who'd been pleasant to her exactly once during orientation week, passed her in the hallway and didn't make eye contact. The senior nurses moved around her like she was furniture with a slightly inconvenient placement. At 2:47, the patient was transferred to surgery. At 3:10, Kara's shift was technically over. She stayed, not because anyone asked her to, but because leaving felt like conceding something she hadn't lost yet. At 4:30, Dr. Felix Drummond called her into his office. It was the first time she'd been inside it. The room smelled like old coffee and recirculated air, and there was a framed medical school degree on the wall that she noticed was slightly crooked, which she thought probably drove him insane every time he looked at it. He sat behind his desk. He didn't offer her a chair. "The patient you flagged," he said. "Yes." He went into surgery 40 minutes ago. Splenic laceration and epidural hematoma. If he'd waited another hour in that corridor, he would have died. She didn't say anything. "You were right," Drummond said. He said it the way someone might admit they'd parked in the wrong spot, factually, without feeling. "I know." His jaw tightened. "I also need to discuss your conduct this afternoon." She blinked. "My conduct? You approached a physician directly with an unsolicited clinical assessment. You failed to go through the charge nurse, which is protocol. You exceeded your authorized scope of practice by conducting an independent patient evaluation without physician direction. And when I told you to stay at your station, you didn't." The room was very quiet. "He would have died," she said. "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point," Drummond said, "is that this department cannot function if every new hire decides their instincts override established chain of command. You don't have the experience to make the calls you made today. You got lucky." "I got right," she said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at her for a moment. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. "You'll receive a formal written warning. I'm recommending a supervised practice period of 60 days. All independent patient contacts suspended until further notice." Kara's hands were very still at her sides. "You're telling me the way I do my job cost that man his life," she said. "That if I had gone through proper channels, charge nurse, then attending, then wait, he would have survived? I'm telling you that protocol exists for a reason. He would have been dead before the charge nurse finished the intake form." Drummond stood up. "That will be all, Novak." She left the office. In the hallway, she stopped and pressed her back to the wall for a moment and looked at the ceiling. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, she realized, from something closer to fury. She pushed off the wall and went back to work. The shaking had stopped by the time her replacement arrived for the evening shift, and Kara had transitioned her patients, updated her charts, and was changing out of her scrubs in the locker room when Patrice Holt came in. Patrice stopped when she saw her. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite respect. Something in between that neither of them had a word for. "You heard?" Kara asked. "About the warning?" "Yeah." Patrice leaned against the lockers with her arms crossed. "For what it's worth, I looked at that patient when they brought him in. Yellow tag seemed right to me. He had unequal pupils. He had a GCS of 14 on the paramedic form. The paramedics were working 18 other patients." Patrice looked at her for a long moment. "You're not wrong. I'm not saying you are. I'm saying—" She stopped, seemed to decide something. "Just be careful, Novak. Drummond doesn't forget." She left. Kara closed her locker. She thought about what being careful would have meant today, and what that man's family would have gotten instead of a surgery report. She picked up her bag and walked out. She was in the parking lot when the black SUV pulled in. Not unusual, she told herself. People drove black SUVs. Hospitals had visitors. But this one stopped near the main entrance at an angle that wasn't a parking angle. And then a second one pulled in behind it. And then a third. She stopped walking. 3 men in dark civilian clothes got out of the first vehicle. Not suits, tactical plainclothes, the kind that wasn't trying to look like anything. They moved with a controlled economy that she'd never seen outside of the one time her brother had taken her to watch his ROTC unit do drills. No wasted motion. Heads on a continuous slow swivel. One of them stopped at the ER entrance and said something to a nurse who'd stepped out for air. The nurse pointed inside. They went in. Kara stood in the parking lot for another 30 seconds. Then she went back inside. She told herself later that she hadn't made a decision. She'd just stopped making the decision to leave. But she went back through the ER entrance and back into the department she'd just exited, and nobody stopped her because she was still in her hospital ID badge, and nobody was looking at her anyway. The 3 men were at the main desk. One of them was showing something to the unit clerk. Not a badge, something smaller. A card. He was asking a question, and the clerk was looking uncertain, and then the clerk picked up the phone. Kara drifted close enough to hear. Looking for the patient admitted around noon, the man from the highway incident. I need to know his current location, and I need to speak to the attending physician who treated him. The clerk said something about privacy protocols. The man said, "Ma'am, this is a federal matter. I need that information in the next 60 seconds. Kara moved to the supply alcove near the desk, the one she'd been using all day, and started rearranging things she'd already arranged. She heard Drummond's voice arriving from the hallway. Someone had paged him. She heard the brief, efficient introductions. She couldn't catch names from this distance, but she caught federal again, and something that sounded like active investigation, and Drummond's voice went through a register shift she'd never heard from him before. Lower, careful. He's in surgery, Drummond said. He's been there approximately 2 hours. Who identified the need for surgery? A pause. One of our nursing staff flagged his condition during triage review. Name. Another pause. Longer. Novak. Kara Novak. The man with the card turned his head and said something to one of the others, and the other one immediately started typing on a phone. Kara put down the supply box she was holding very slowly and quietly. The patient in the surgery suite upstairs had said, compromised with what might have been the last organized thought in his head, and 3 federal agents had arrived within 4 hours of him being admitted, and they were asking for her name. She understood suddenly and completely that whatever she had walked into today, she was still walking into it. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Text from an unknown number. No introduction, no name. Don't go home tonight. They know you saw him. Kara stared at the text for 3 seconds, then looked up at the ER desk, where the federal agents were still talking to Drummond, and made a decision that wasn't really a decision at all. It was just her feet moving before her brain could argue them out of it. She walked toward the back exit. Not fast, not slow. The pace of someone who had somewhere to be that wasn't here, which was true, even if she didn't know where that was yet. She kept her ID badge visible and her chin level, and she did not look back at the desk, because looking back was what people did when they were running from something. And she wasn't running. She was leaving. There was a difference, and she needed to believe in it. The back corridor led past radiology and through the service hallway that the maintenance crew used for equipment transport. She'd learned it by accident in week 1 when she'd taken a wrong turn looking for the linen supply, and she'd filed it away the way she filed away everything. Not because she expected to need it, just because knowing the layout of a space felt like basic competence. The door at the far end opened to the side parking lot, the one used mostly by staff on the overnight shift, which meant it was half empty now in the late afternoon and nobody was standing near it. She pushed through the door, and the October heat hit her like a flat hand. She walked to her car, a 2019 Civic with a cracked rear bumper and a parking permit for Lot C that she hadn't peeled off from her last clinical placement, and she sat in the driver's seat without starting it and read the text again. Don't go home tonight. They know you saw him. Unknown number. No context. No follow-up message. She stared at it for another moment and then typed back, "Who is this?" The message delivered. She watched the screen. No response came. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and pressed both hands flat on the steering wheel and tried to think. The man in the corridor had said, compromised. One word, one breath, most of his functional capacity spent on getting it out. It wasn't a random word. It wasn't delirium. It was a message delivered to the first person who'd gotten close enough to receive it, which had been her. She didn't know what it referred to. The situation, himself, the hospital, something she had no context for. But the word itself was deliberate. She was sure of that. The federal agents had asked for her name within minutes of arriving. She started the car. She didn't go home. The motel on Route 9 was called the Desert Pines, which was optimistic given that there were no pines anywhere visible, and the landscaping consisted of gravel and 2 dying succulents near the office door. Kara paid cash, she had $63 in her wallet, which got her one night in a room that smelled like old carpet and someone else's anxiety. She sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands and her bag on the floor and thought about calling her sister in Flagstaff. She didn't call. She didn't know yet what she would say. She pulled up the Harlan Ridge Memorial staff directory on her phone, found Alejandro Voss's direct line, and then stopped with her thumb over the call button. Voss had listened to her. Voss had walked to that stretcher and seen what she saw and done something about it. But Voss had also walked away without saying a word to her, and he'd told Drummond not come back to her directly, and she didn't know what that meant about whose side he was on, if sides were what this was. She didn't call Voss. She called her brother instead. Danny Novak picked up on the second ring, which meant he was at the firehouse and not on a call. "Hey, you okay?" "No," she said. "Not exactly." "What happened?" "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me straight." She heard him shift, the sound of him moving somewhere quieter. If someone at a crash scene had a wound that didn't match the accident, something narrow, deliberate, already dressed before the paramedics got there, what would that mean? Silence for a moment. It would mean they were hurt before the crash. Yeah. Or the crash was staged. Yeah, she said again. "Kara." His voice had gone flat and careful in the way it did when he was taking something seriously. "What did you do today?" "I saved someone's life." "And?" "And I think someone didn't want him saved." Danny was quiet for 5 seconds. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm in a motel." "Which one?" "I'm not telling you which one." "Kara." "I'm not dragging you into this, Danny. I just needed to hear your voice." She paused. "And verify my own logic." "Your logic sounds correct and terrifying. Will you please tell me what's actually happening?" "Not yet. Soon. I love you." She hung up before he could argue. She lay back on the motel bed without taking off her shoes and stared at the ceiling and let herself feel, for the first time since the parking lot, how scared she actually was. It lasted about 2 minutes. Then she sat back up because lying there being scared wasn't useful, and she was fundamentally, constitutionally resistant to not being useful. Her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from the same unknown number. Room 114, Desert Pines. "We've been watching since you left the hospital. Don't panic. We're the ones trying to keep you alive." Kara looked at the room number on the key card in her hand. 114. She stood up slowly and went to the window and looked through the gap in the curtains without pulling them. The parking lot was ordinary. 3 cars, a truck, the motel office light, nothing that looked like surveillance. She went to the door and checked the deadbolt, checked the chain, sat back down on the bed. Her phone rang. Unknown number, same one. She answered it. "Don't turn the lights off and don't open the door," a man's voice said. Not unkind, not warm either, professional. "Someone will come to you in about 20 minutes. I know this is not ideal. I need you to stay where you are." "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone your patient asked us to protect." "The man from the corridor?" "Yes. He's in surgery. He made it through. He's in recovery." A pause. "He asked about the nurse, specifically." Kara absorbed that. "What's his name?" "That's not something I can give you over a phone." "Then give me something, because from where I'm standing, I'm sitting in a motel room I checked into 40 minutes ago that you somehow know the number of, and I have no reason to believe you're who you say you are." Another pause. Longer. Then, his forearm wound was a through and through from a 9mm. The crash was not an accident. He was run off the road approximately 4 miles east of the accident site, and the vehicle that hit him didn't stop. He had been under active threat for 11 days before today. The voice paused again. Does that help? It helped in the sense that it confirmed everything she'd already suspected, which didn't make her feel better, but did make her feel less alone in what she knew. 20 minutes, she said. 20 minutes. She hung up. Awesome. It was closer to 30, which she noted with the specific irritation of someone running on adrenaline and very little else since breakfast. The knock when it came was 3 short and 2 long, a pattern that she thought was probably intentional, a way of signaling before the door opened that it wasn't the wrong kind of person. She still didn't open it immediately. Who's there? Lena Marsh, a woman's voice. I was in the black SUV in Bay 2. You didn't look at me when you came back inside, I noticed. Kara opened the door, and the woman was about 40, with short dark hair that had a few threads of silver in it, and the kind of face that had spent time in outdoor conditions, weathered at the edges, watchful around the eyes. She was wearing civilian clothes, plain and dark, and she was not visibly armed, which either meant she wasn't or that she was better at it than the agents Kara had watched in the ER. Kara Novak, Lena said. Not a question. That's me. Kara stepped back to let her in, and Lena came inside and did a quick, casual sweep of the room that wasn't casual at all. She sat in the chair by the small table. Kara sat on the edge of the bed. I'm going to explain the situation, Lena said, and then I'm going to tell you what we need from you, and then you get to say no. That's the sequence. Okay. The man you saved today is a federal operative. I'm not going to say which agency or which unit because that information isn't mine to share, but he's been embedded in an active investigation for the past 7 months. 3 weeks ago, his cover was compromised. Someone inside the operation fed his identity to the people he was investigating. He's been trying to get out since then. Today was his 3rd attempt to reach a secure location. The first 2 were intercepted. Kara was very still. The crash. Staged, yes. They ran him off the road and they intended for him to die at the scene or shortly after. The forearm wound happened before the crash. That was from the pursuit. He managed to get himself into the ambulance flow because he knew the hospitals in this area, knew that Harlan Ridge was the closest level 2 trauma center, and he was trying to get to a controlled environment where he could signal for extraction. Lena paused. He didn't expect to be tagged secondary and left in a hallway. Neither did I, Kara said. No. Something shifted in Lena's expression. Not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. What you did in that corridor, flagging him, pushing for the reassessment, that kept him alive long enough for us to reach him. We were 40 minutes out when he went into the hospital. The text message, Kara said, the one telling me not to go home. That was one of mine. He'd managed to send a burst transmission before surgery, barely coherent, but enough to tell us that a nurse had flagged him and to protect her. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on Route 9, its headlights sweeping across the curtain gap and gone. You said you needed something from me, Kara said. The people who targeted him, they're not sure he survived. They don't have eyes on the hospital's surgical suite, but they do have someone inside the hospital. Lena said it flatly, like a fact on a chart. Someone who was watching admissions today, who saw him get flagged, who reported back that there was a nurse who wouldn't leave it alone. Kara felt something cold settle in her chest. That's why they know my name. Yes, and right now they're deciding whether you're a threat or just an inconvenience. Lena leaned forward slightly. We need to know who inside that hospital made the call. We have a list of possibles, but we don't have confirmation, and we don't have enough basis to walk in there and start interviewing staff without the insider knowing we're looking. You want me to go back? I want you to consider it. Kara looked at the wall for a moment. Then, I just got a formal written warning today for exceeding my scope of practice. If I walk back in there tomorrow morning, I'm going to be watched. Drummond already doesn't trust me. We know. Lena reached into her jacket and set a card on the table. No name, just a number. Sleep on it. I'll be outside until 6 a.m. You don't need to. Yes, I do. Lena stood. You don't have protection otherwise. That's not negotiable. and it's not something I'm asking permission for." She moved toward the door. "For what it's worth, Novak, we've been watching this hospital for 6 weeks. You're the first person in that building who saw what was actually in front of them." She left. Kara sat with the card on the table and the room around her and the particular grinding weight of being 23 years old and 22 days into her first real job and somehow at the center of something she had no map for. She didn't sleep much. When she did, she dreamed about that man's chest barely moving, the 3-second pause between breaths, and the word he'd spent what might have been his last coherent effort to say. Compromised. She was back in the hospital parking lot by 6:45 the next morning. She'd made the decision somewhere around 4 a.m., which was when she'd stopped pretending she was going to make a different one. She was a nurse. She'd walked into that ER 3 weeks ago because she believed in what nursing actually was, not the version Drummond described, the one about chain of command and staying in your lane, but the version that meant you looked at a person and saw what was actually happening to them, and then you did something about it. Walking away from this felt like the same failure she'd refused to make yesterday. She walked through the ER entrance and went directly to the locker room to change into scrubs. Patrice Holt was at the nurse's station when she came out, coffee in hand, chart in the other. Patrice looked at her the way people looked at someone who'd come back from somewhere they hadn't expected. "You're early," Patrice said. "Couldn't sleep." Patrice studied her for a second. Something moved behind her eyes. "Drummond's not in yet." "I know. You might want to be gone before he gets here." "I might want to," Kara agreed. "I'm not going to be, though." Patrice looked at her for another moment, then went back to her chart. Kara went to work. The morning was routine in the way ER mornings sometimes were. A lull after the overnight rush, the department breathing between emergencies. She did her job. She watched. She paid attention to everyone the way she always paid attention, but now with a sharper, more deliberate focus that she hoped read as nothing more than conscientiousness. There were 17 permanent staff members on the floor who would have had access to the admissions board during yesterday's chaos. She knew from Lena's briefing that the insider had made a phone call sometime between 12:30 and 2 p.m. That was the window the operatives people had tracked, a call from inside the hospital to an external number that showed up on network monitoring but hadn't been sourced to a specific device yet. She watched. Not everyone, not obviously. The way she'd learned to watch patients during triage, peripheral, cataloging, building a picture from the pieces that didn't announce themselves. The clerk who'd been at the admissions desk during the relevant window. The 2 residents who'd been floated to secondary care. The tech who'd brought the crash cart to the corridor. And Patrice Holt, who had been at the nurse's station the entire time, who had access to every chart and every movement log in the department, who had told her this morning that Drummond wasn't in yet in a tone that might have been protective or might have been something else. Kara didn't want it to be Patrice. She was aware that not wanting something to be true was the fastest way to miss evidence that it was. Drummond arrived at 8:20 a.m., and Kara knew from the angle of his walk before he even got to the desk that something had changed since yesterday. He walked to his office, not the floor. He didn't do his usual morning rounds. His door stayed closed. At 8:45, he came out and looked for her specifically. "Novak. My office." She followed him. He sat down behind his desk and she stood because he still didn't offer the chair, and he looked at her with an expression that was different from anything she'd seen on his face before. Not the dismissiveness, not the professional irritation, something that looked almost like discomfort. "I received a call this morning," he said. "Okay, from outside the hospital, regarding the patient from yesterday." He picked up a pen, set it down. They were asking specific questions about the staff involved in his care, about you specifically. Kara kept her face neutral. "What kind of questions?" "Your schedule, your personal information, whether you were here today." He was watching her carefully. "Do you know why someone outside this hospital would be asking those questions about you?" She thought about Lena sitting outside in a car all night. She thought about the word compromised and what it cost to say it. "I might," she said. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to tell you about it." His jaw moved. "That's not a satisfying answer." "I know. I'm sorry." "Novak." He stopped, seemed to decide something, and she had the strange sensation of watching Drummond struggle with something that didn't come easily to him, which was the possibility that he'd been wrong about something. "The patient you flagged yesterday. His status this morning is stable, post-operative. The attending in the surgical suite said that if he'd arrived 60 to 90 minutes later than he did, survival was unlikely. He paused again. I want you to understand that I understand that. Dead. Okay, she said carefully. The written warning stands. He said it like he had to get it out before he could continue. Protocol is protocol. But I want you to know I understand what you did. It wasn't an apology. She didn't think Felix Drummond was capable of a direct apology. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. Thank you, she said, and meant it, more than she expected to. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. The people who called asking about you this morning, they identified themselves as hospital auditors. Routine compliance review. He let that sit for a second. We don't have a compliance review scheduled. She turned back. No, she said. You wouldn't. His eyes held hers. Be careful today. She had lunch in the break room at 12:30, which she chose deliberately because the break room had a clear sight line to the main hallway, and its single blind spot was the medication prep area, which she could monitor in the reflective surface of the microwave door. It was not a technique she'd learned in nursing school. She was eating a sandwich she didn't taste when Marcus Webb sat down across from her. Webb was 28, a second-year resident who was competent enough and had been indifferent to her since orientation. He sat down with a coffee and looked at his phone and then looked at her in the sideways way of someone who wanted to say something and was deciding the angle. The patient from yesterday, he said. You know they moved him? Out of surgical recovery? Off the floor entirely. Webb's voice was low. Not conspiratorial exactly, but careful. I heard they moved him to a secure room. There were people with him this morning who weren't hospital staff. How do you know they weren't hospital staff? He looked at her flatly. They were carrying. She took another bite of her sandwich. Okay. Does that not alarm you? It alarms me a little, she said honestly. Webb turned his coffee cup in a circle. He had a nervous habit of rotating things. She'd noticed it in the first week. Someone asked me this morning about you. A guy I didn't recognize said he was with biomedical compliance. Asked about your shift yesterday, what time you arrived, when you flagged the patient, whether you had access to the patient's chart. What did you tell him? Nothing useful. I didn't know most of it. He looked at her directly for the first time. What is going on? I genuinely can't tell you. Can't or won't? Both, she said. I'm sorry. He nodded slowly. Stood up, paused. The guy asking about you. He had a hospital visitor badge, but he kept it turned so you couldn't read the name. I didn't notice until he was leaving. He picked up his coffee. Thought you should know. He left. Kara sat with her sandwich and the specific, expanding awareness that whatever was happening in this hospital was moving faster than she'd thought, and that staying ahead of it was going to require something she didn't have yet, which was information. She pulled out her phone under the table and texted the number Lena had left her. Someone inside the hospital is asking staff about me. Has a visitor badge. I think we're running out of time. The response came in under a minute. We know. Don't move from your current location. We have a team at the entrance now. This just became an active extraction. Kara read the message, set her phone down, looked at her sandwich, picked it back up and finished it, because she had eaten almost nothing since yesterday afternoon, and whatever was about to happen, she wasn't going to face it. Hungry. She was standing up to take her trash to the bin when the fire alarm went off. Not a drill. She knew the difference. A drill got preceded by a PA announcement, always hospital protocol. This was the alarm without the announcement, the sudden screaming of every alert system in the building simultaneously, and the break room door opened and Marcus Webb looked in with an expression that had shifted from careful to something else entirely. It's coming from the 4th floor, he said. Surgical recovery. The floor where they'd moved the patient. Kara was already moving. She got to the stairwell door and had her hand on it when someone grabbed her arm from behind. A full hand grip. Not a touch, not a direction, a grip. And she turned and found a man she'd never seen. No scrubs, no white coat. Visitor badge turned inward, and his eyes were doing something that wasn't panic and wasn't confusion, but was the focused, assessing look of someone who had found what they were looking for. You need to come with me, he said. Let go of my arm, she said. He didn't. The stairwell door opened from the other side. Lena Marsh came through it, and behind her 2 men who moved the way the agents in the parking lot had moved, and the man holding Kara's arm registered all 3 of them in less than a second and made a calculation, and his grip shifted, changed, no longer holding her, now using her. And she felt his weight pivot and understood what was about to happen and did the only thing that made any sense, which was drop. Dead weight, straight down, knees to the floor, out of his grip and out of the line between him and Lena's team, and she heard shouting above her and the sound of motion and someone hitting a wall, and then hands on her shoulders. Lena's hands, she knew from the grip, controlled and specific. "You okay?" "Yes." She got her feet under her. "The 4th floor, handled." Lena's voice was tight. "We have people there, come on." The man with the visitor badge was face down on the floor with 2 federal agents on him, and he was not resisting anymore. And in the sudden relative quiet, Kara could hear the fire alarm still going and the distant sound of the hospital's evacuation protocol beginning to roll through the PA system. She looked at the man on the floor, at the visitor badge still turned inward. She reached down and flipped it. The name on the badge was Dr. H. Calloway, Biomedical Compliance. Fake. Clean fabrication, decent laminate job, the kind of thing that passed a 5-second front desk check without any deeper verification. She'd seen the template format before on legitimate badges. She'd also seen, in her 3 weeks on this floor, every single physician and compliance officer who'd actually come through that department because she paid attention to who was in her space and why. This man had never been here before today. She straightened up. "He came in with a badge," she said to Lena, "which means someone at the front desk let him through. Someone who knew what name to expect." Lena looked at her. "That's the insider," Kara said. "Not someone on the medical staff, someone at admissions." Lena was already reaching for her radio. Down the hall, the PA system crackled, and a voice Kara recognized as the hospital administrator, Roy Gaines, came on to announce a controlled evacuation of floors 3 through 5, calm and orderly, and Kara thought about Roy Gaines, who had been at the hospital for 12 years, who ran the board meetings, who had final sign-off on every major staffing and security decision in the building, and who had personally called Drummond this morning, according to what she'd overheard at the station, to ask which nurse had been involved in flagging the patient from the highway. She thought about that. She thought about it very carefully. And then she took out her phone and typed one more text to Lena's number, because Lena was 3 feet away with a radio to her ear, and this wasn't something she wanted to say out loud in a hallway with unknown ears. "I think you're looking at the wrong level of staff. Check who authorized the visitor badge. Check who has override access to the admission security log. And check who called Drummond this morning asking about me by name before the hospital's official phones were even open." She sent it. Watched Lena read it across the hallway. Watched Lena's expression do something that confirmed what she already knew. The insider wasn't a nurse. The insider wasn't a doctor. The insider ran the building. Lena lowered the radio. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her phone, at the text, and then at Kara, and the look she gave her was the kind that people gave when they were recalibrating something they thought they already understood. "Roy Gaines," she said. "I don't know for certain," Kara said. "But he called Drummond before 7:30 this morning, asking about me by name. The main hospital line doesn't open until 8. He used a direct line that isn't listed on the staff directory. And the visitor badge." She stopped. Down the hall, the evacuation PA was still going, and staff were beginning to filter out of rooms in the organized, slightly dazed way of people following a protocol they'd drilled but hadn't expected to use. "Someone with administrative override issued that badge after hours. It's in the system. You can pull it." "Bush." "Bah." Lena was already talking into the radio again, low and clipped, and Kara caught fragments. "Administrative access, badge issuance log, last 12 hours. And then Lena moved 2 steps away, and the conversation became inaudible. The 2 agents who'd taken down the man with the fake badge were moving him toward the stairwell, and he was going with them now in the boneless, cooperative way of someone who'd run the calculation and decided resistance was no longer useful. His face was turned away from her. She'd seen it for maybe 4 seconds total, but she'd remember it. Mid-40s, a scar along the jaw that was old and faded, eyes that had done their threat assessment and come up empty when Lena's team came through the door. He'd expected to find one nurse alone in a hospital hallway. He'd been wrong about that. She thought about what that meant, that someone had sent him here with incomplete information, that whoever was running this operation from outside had told him that Kara Novak was an isolated, expendable complication, a 23-year-old first-job nurse who could be collected and removed without significant resistance. Wrong on both counts, but not by much. She was still standing in the hallway when Marcus Webb appeared at the far end, moving against the evacuation flow, looking for something. His eyes found her, and he came toward her with the expression of a man who had crossed some internal threshold and was now committed to whatever was on the other side of it. "The 4th floor," he said when he reached her. "What's actually up there?" "A patient who needs protection." "From who?" "I can't tell you that." "Is this connected to the man you flagged yesterday?" She looked at him. He was smart, Webb. She'd clocked that in the first week, underneath the indifference. He had the kind of observational intelligence that good residents either developed early or never did, and he'd been putting pieces together since this morning. "Go with the evacuation," she said. Please. I mean that. I'm a physician, Novak. If there's a patient, the patient has people with him. He doesn't need more medical staff right now." She held his eyes. "He needs the floor clear. Go." Webb held her gaze for another 3 seconds, then did something she didn't expect, which was nod without argument and turn around and go. She watched him leave. Then she turned back to where Lena was finishing her radio call. The 4th floor had been cleared in under 12 minutes, which was good evacuation execution for a busy surgical recovery ward, and Kara thought briefly about whoever had drilled those nurses because they'd earned whatever they were paid. The fire alarm had been triggered by someone on Lena's team. Not a real fire, a controlled activation to get non-essential personnel moving without explaining why. And the official story being run through hospital admin right now was a gas sensor malfunction in the utility corridor. Kara didn't know who was maintaining that story on the administrative side, and she was becoming increasingly aware that the administrative side was the part she didn't have full visibility on. She and Lena took the stairwell to 4. The operative, she still didn't have his name, was in room 412, which was a single-occupancy recovery room at the end of the corridor. 2 men outside the door that she didn't recognize, both with the same controlled stillness as Lena's team. One of them looked at Kara and looked at Lena, and Lena gave a small nod. He opened the door. The room was dim. The window blinds were down. The man in the bed was not the near corpse she'd seen on a stretcher in the corridor yesterday afternoon. He was upright, partially, propped against pillows, with IV lines still running and a cardiac monitor beeping at a rhythm that was weak but consistent. He was pale in a way that surgery will do to a person, with bruising along his jaw and left eye that hadn't been visible under the gray-white of his collapse. He was awake. He looked at her when she came in. "You're the nurse," he said. His voice was rough. "Intubation," she noted automatically, "post-surgical swelling." "Kara Novak," she said. He nodded once. "Garrett Moss." She took the name, filed it. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot and then had my spleen taken out." A short pause. "So, accurate." She moved to the monitor out of habit, checked his numbers without touching anything. Heart rate 88, blood pressure low but not in crisis range, oxygen sat at 94, acceptable for post-operative recovery, but she'd have preferred 96. She looked at the IV bag, checked the rate. "The morphine drip is low," she said to the room. "I asked them to drop it," Moss said. "I need to be able to think." "You also need to be able to heal. Pain response triggers cortisol. Cortisol slows tissue repair." Nurse Novak. "Mr. Moss." He almost smiled. It looked like it hurt. "I'll let you adjust it after we talk." She stepped back and let Lena take the space near the bed. There was a third person in the room she'd barely registered, a man sitting in the chair near the window, early 50s, in plain clothes with a tablet on his knee and the particular invisible quality of someone trained to be unnoticed. "This is Agent Soren Dial," Lena said. "He's been running the investigation. Garrett is his operative." Dial looked up from the tablet. He had a broad, flat face and glasses that were slightly wrong for it, like they'd been chosen quickly, and he looked at Kara with the direct, unhurried assessment of someone who made decisions about people's trustworthiness for a living. "You identified the insider," he said. "I flagged a possibility. The badge log confirms it." Roy Gaines issued an after-hours visitor credential at 11:47 p.m. last night to a name that doesn't appear anywhere in any legitimate compliance database. Dial set the tablet down. Which makes you the third person in the last 7 months to connect Gaines to this operation. The first two didn't get to tell anyone. The room absorbed that. "What is this operation?" Kara said. It came out less like a question and more like a statement of intent. She wasn't asking. She was declaring that she needed to know. Dial looked at Lena. Lena looked at Kara. "Pharmaceutical diversion," Lena said. Moss has spent 7 months embedded in a network that's been routing controlled substances out of Harlan Ridge's pharmacy, falsifying inventory records, and distributing through a chain that goes 3 states out. Gaines has been the anchor point. He controls the administrative records, the audit schedule, and the supply chain approvals. Without him, the network collapses. "How much are we talking about?" Kara said. "In street value," Dial said. "Approximately $9 million over 14 months. And the people who ran Garrett off the road yesterday. Enforcers. Outside contract brought in when Moss's cover started fraying 3 weeks ago." Dial's voice was even, factual. "They were supposed to make him disappear before he could transmit. He didn't disappear. You're the reason he didn't disappear." She sat with that for a moment. "Roy Gaines," she said. "He's been in this building all morning." "Yes." "He made the PA announcement. He's running the evacuation." "Yes." "Does he know you're here?" Dial paused. Half a second, no more. "We believe he's aware that the extraction attempt on you failed. He would have had contact from the operative your team apprehended downstairs, which means he knows his inside asset is in federal custody and he is currently making decisions about his next move. Can't you just arrest him? We need the transmission Garrett was carrying. The burst Garrett sent before surgery, it was partial. The full data package, the records that prove the network, is still in the field. Garrett was the carrier." Lena paused. "He had it on him when they ran him off the road. They took it during the crash. We need to know where it is and who has it now, and Garrett hasn't been coherent enough until this morning to tell us." Every head in the room turned to the bed. Moss looked like he was working through something behind his eyes. The morphine being low meant he was present, but present came with its own cost, and she could see the calculation happening in real time. How much to say? How much was safe to say? How much he could afford to say before whatever was left of his operational caution overrode the need. "Gaines doesn't have it," he said. "I had the package separated. Component parts, different carriers, none of them connected to me on paper." He stopped. Took a breath that clearly cost him. "But one of the carriers is in this hospital." Nobody spoke. "I had 3 extraction points set up. If the primary failed, which it did, the carriers were supposed to converge at the secondary point, but I went into surgery." He looked at Kara. "Who found me first?" "After triage." "I did," she said, "before the paramedics moved me. Did you see anyone approach the stretcher?" She went back through it. The corridor. The stretcher against the wall. The noise of the trauma bay. She'd crossed the room when she saw his color, checked his pulse, started talking to him. Before that, she'd come from the supply alcove. The main desk had been to her left, the trauma bay behind her. "There was a tech," she said slowly, moving toward the corridor from the supply side. "I didn't think anything of it because it was chaos. Everyone was moving. He had a cart." She paused. "He didn't stop at any of the active patients." Moss's jaw tightened. "Tall, 40-something, moved like someone used to carrying weight." "Yes. That's not a hospital tech," Moss said. "That's my secondary carrier. He was extracting the package before anyone could identify me as more than a crash victim." He closed his eye briefly, opened it. "If he got out before the lockdown, if he's not in the building, I can check," Kara said. Every person in the room looked at her. "Security log tracks every badge exit," she said. "I have access to the secondary log terminal in the nursing station on this floor because I'm on the surgical rotation cross-training schedule. It's not a high-clearance pull. I can see who badged out in the last 24 hours without triggering an admin flag." Dial was already on his feet. "Do it," Lena said. The nursing station on 4 was empty. The floor had cleared with the evacuation, and Kara sat at the terminal and pulled up the badge log without hurrying, because hurrying made mistakes, and mistakes in a system like this left traces. She entered her credentials, pulled the exit log for the previous 18 hours, and sorted by time. There were 42 badge exits between noon and 4 p.m. yesterday, normal volume for a shift change plus the evacuation prep. She scrolled through names she recognized, cross-referencing against the mental map she'd built of who'd been where. The text she'd seen in the corridor wasn't on the permanent staff list. She'd registered that in the back of her mind even then, and now it surfaced cleanly. His scrubs had been the right color but a slightly wrong cut, and his cart had a different wheel profile than the standard supply carts she'd been working with for 3 weeks. She filtered for temporary and contract staff. 11 exits in the window. She ran through them. 8 had valid contractor credentials with full check-in records. 2 were vendor representatives whose companies had standing access agreements. 1 was a partial entry, badge out, no corresponding badge in, which meant whoever it was had either entered through an unmonitored access point or had entered before the log window she was pulling. She looked at the partial entry. Badge ID T-0047. Issued. She checked the issuance record that morning. At 7:12 a.m., Roy Gaines's administrative signature on the issuance. Exit time, 2:34 p.m. yesterday. 15 minutes after she'd flagged Moss for emergency reassessment. 15 minutes after the secondary carrier would have known that the patient was going to get real medical attention, and the window to move the package was closing. She took a photograph of the screen with her phone, then pulled the access point log for badge T-0047's exit. He'd left through the East Service exit, the one she'd used yesterday, the maintenance corridor. She pulled up the service exit camera log and found the timestamp and then sat looking at a blank screen because the camera on the East Service exit had been offline since 11 p.m. the night before. She checked the maintenance log, reported outage. No repair ticket. The camera had gone offline and nobody had filed a ticket to fix it. The report had been logged by the facilities coordinator, who reported to Roy Gaines. She sat back. The secondary carrier had gotten out. He'd been given a clean exit. Camera killed, badge ready, window of time created by the chaos of the mass-casualty intake. Gaines had been running interference on multiple levels simultaneously. She was typing the text to Lena when the nursing station door opened behind her. She turned. Roy Gaines was standing in the doorway. He was 61, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had spent years looking trustworthy at board meetings and charitable functions and hospital fundraisers. He had a radio on his hip and a tablet under his arm, and his expression was doing the thing that faces did when they were performing a version of themselves, the small, administrative frown of a man managing an unexpected disruption. "Nurse Novak," he said. "This floor is under evacuation protocol." She had her phone on the desk with her hand over it. She did not look at the phone. "I was pulling a patient log. Dr. Drummond asked for it. The evacuation supersedes routine chart pulls." "I know. I'm almost done." He looked at her. His eyes went to the terminal screen and she'd already closed the badge log. It was the standard patient chart interface visible now, a reflex that she was profoundly grateful for. "You had quite a day yesterday," he said. He said it with the specific tone of a man making conversation while thinking about something else. "It was a busy shift. The patient you flagged." He moved one step into the room. "He's doing well, I understand." "I heard that too." Unusual situation. Another step. He was now between her and the door. "Federal involvement, all very—" He seemed to search for a word. "Complicated." "Hospitals see complicated cases sometimes," she said. She was doing the calculation. The door was behind him. The window was to her left, 4th floor, not a useful exit. Her phone was under her hand. She had 2 choices. She could try to get past him, or she could keep him talking, and keep him talking was the better play as long as talking was what he was doing. "You've been asking questions," Gaines said. The administrative warmth had gone out of his voice. It happened fast, one sentence to the next, the performance dropping like a coat someone had decided they didn't need anymore. "To the agents, to Dr. Drummond, at the admissions terminal." He paused. "You're a very observant young woman for someone with 3 weeks of experience." 22 days, she said. "People keep mentioning that." "It would be a shame," he said, "if a promising career ended before it really began." She looked at him. He looked at her. She hit send on the text without looking at her phone. She'd already typed it, the camera log, the badge, his name. She hit send by touch and then flattened her hand over the screen so the sent confirmation light didn't show. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "you should know that what I pulled from the terminal in the last 5 minutes has already been sent to people who are looking for exactly that information." His expression shifted. Something tightened around his eyes. "That might be a bluff," he said. "It might be," she agreed. The radio on his hip crackled, a voice she didn't recognize, short and tight. "We have a problem on 3. Gaines's hand went to the radio. His eyes stayed on her. Then the door behind him opened from the outside, hard and fast, and Lena Marsh came through it with 2 agents behind her, and Gaines moved, not toward Kara, not toward Lena, but sideways toward the terminal, and she understood what he was going for a half-second before he got there. The badge log. His name on the issuance. The evidence she'd been looking at. She got there first. She didn't know how. Her body made the decision before her brain did, the same way it had in the corridor yesterday, and she stepped in front of the terminal and put herself between Gaines and the keyboard. And for one genuinely unpleasant moment, she was close enough to see the calculation in his face as he decided whether she was worth removing physically. Lena's voice. "Gaines, hands." He stopped. Kara didn't move. He looked at her one more time. Something in his face that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite admiration, something that had no comfortable name. And then he turned and looked at the agents behind Lena, and he put his hands up. She stepped away from the terminal, and her legs were shaking slightly, which she'd expected, and she leaned against the desk and let them shake because there was no one here she needed to perform steadiness for. Lena's team moved Gaines out into the corridor. The door stayed open, and through it Kara could hear Lena beginning the formal detention language, low and efficient, and then another agent's voice overlapping with information about rights, and the administrative radio on Gaines's hip crackling again with that same tight voice asking for a status update that was never going to get answered. She sat down in the chair in front of the terminal, pulled up the badge log again. T-0047, exit at 2:34 p.m. Package in the wind. Secondary carrier already outside the building, already 11 hours ahead of anyone who was looking. She thought about the burst transmission Moss had sent before surgery. Partial. Not enough. She thought about 3 extraction points, 1 compromised, 1 unknown. She thought about $9 million of diverted pharmaceuticals and a network that went 3 states out, and a hospital administrator who had been running it from behind a desk and a fundraising smile for 14 months. She thought about what a 3rd extraction point looked like. She opened a new search in the system. Not the badge log, the pharmacy audit trail, which was accessible from the nursing station terminal under a different clearance pathway that she technically had, because she was cross-rotated to surgical, and surgical had pharmacy audit read access for pain management documentation. She pulled the last 30 days. 14 months of diversion. 9 million. But the audit trail she was looking at right now, the last 30 days, showed something she didn't expect. Not high-volume, high-value items moving in bulk. Single-dose discrepancies. Patient-specific entries, small amounts, the kind of thing that looked like normal variants in a busy surgical recovery ward. A pattern that only looked like a pattern if you were looking for it. She was looking for it. She pulled the patient admission records alongside the pharmacy log and started cross-referencing, and the shape of it began to emerge. Specific patients, specific dates, specific nurses whose credential codes appeared on the dispense records. Not random. Targeted. Someone had been using patient admissions as cover events, creating legitimate-looking dispense records against real patients to mask the diversion, and the credential codes on the records. She stopped. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long time. One of the credential codes appearing in the records, the one with the highest frequency in the last 2 weeks, the one attached to the cleanest-looking entries, the ones that would pass a surface audit without a second look, was hers. Her employee number, her credential code, assigned to dispense events she had never performed, on shifts she had worked, entered at timestamps that matched her physical presence in the building. Someone had been building a paper trail that put her hands on every clean-looking dispense record in the last 2 weeks of diversion activity. Someone who had access to her credential, who knew her schedule, who had been setting this up long before yesterday, long before she'd ever seen the man on the stretcher. She had been chosen specifically to be the fall. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because she was new enough that it would be believable, because she had no institutional relationships to defend her, because she had already been written up once by Drummond, already flagged as a problem employee, already positioned perfectly as someone with motive and access and a short history that could be rewritten. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, opened them. She had been set up before she even knew there was a game. She copied the full audit log to her phone, screenshots, all of it, the credential entries, the timestamps, the patient cross-reference. And then she stood up and went to the door, and in the hallway, Lena was on the radio again with Gaines somewhere behind her in federal custody, and Kara waited until there was a gap and said, "Lena." Lena turned. "There's a third problem." Kara held up her phone. "Someone has been building a case against me in the pharmacy records, my credentials, my schedule. Someone with admin access who's been doing it for 2 weeks." She paused. "And the secondary carrier? The package Garrett needed. I think it's still in the building." Lena looked at her phone. "How do you know it's still here?" "Because the diversion pattern in the pharmacy log changed 12 days ago." Kara pulled up the screenshot. "The entries start looking cleaner, more careful, like someone got nervous and started moving smaller amounts through better cover. That's not a network winding down. That's a network getting ready to move everything at once." She looked at Lena. "The full package isn't in the field. It's in this building. Gaines was going to move it when he moved the secondary carrier, but the carrier got out early because Moss showed up when he wasn't supposed to." Lena was already on the radio. "Where in the building?" she asked simultaneously before the radio connected. Kara looked at the pharmacy log. The last entry. The most recent clean-looking cover dispense. The patient room number attached to it. Room 308, 3rd floor. She looked at Lena. "The floor they evacuated first," she said. The radio in Lena's hand crackled, and a voice came through that was not one of her team's voices, not controlled and professional, but tight and short and wrong in a way that made the back of Kara's neck go cold. "We've got a body on 3. Maintenance closet, southeast corner. Male, 40-something. No ID. The secondary carrier." He hadn't gotten out at all. He'd been stopped before he could leave, and the package had been taken from him, and whoever had taken it was still in the building, and the evacuation had cleared the floor and given them space to move, and Kara looked at Lena and saw the same recognition landing at the same moment. The evacuation hadn't flushed the threat out. It had given the threat exactly what it needed. Lena was moving before the radio finished crackling. She turned to the nearest agent and said something in a clipped, compressed shorthand that Kara didn't fully catch. Something about 3 South and containment and a name she didn't recognize. And then she turned back to Kara with the expression of someone who had just had their operational timeline cut in half. "Stay on this floor," Lena said. "Don't use the elevator. Don't go to 3. The package? I know where the package is. Stay here." She was gone before Kara could say anything else. Both agents with her, the stairwell door swinging shut behind them, and the 4th floor was suddenly enormously quiet. The evacuation PA had cycled off. The alarm had stopped. The corridor stretched in both directions with the particular hollow silence of a space that was supposed to have people in it and didn't. Kara stood at the nursing station door for approximately 15 seconds. Then she went to the stairwell and went down to 3. She told herself it wasn't defiance. It was the same thing she'd been doing since yesterday, following the logic of the situation to wherever it actually led, regardless of where someone had told her to stand. She was aware this was the kind of reasoning that had already gotten her a written warning and a formal review period and a target on her back. And she was also aware that the alternative, staying on 4 while the thing she'd found played out 1 floor below her without her, was not something she was physically capable of. The 3rd floor corridor was not empty. 2 of Lena's agents were at the far end near the southeast corner, and there was police tape going up around the maintenance closet, and a man she didn't recognize in plain clothes was crouched near the floor outside the door. The body was inside. She couldn't see it from here, and she didn't try to see it. She registered the yellow hazard markers, the controlled movement of the agents, the way the space had been sectioned and was being worked. She looked at room 308. The door was closed. She walked toward it. One of the agents at the end of the corridor saw her and started to call out, Ma'am, this floor is... And she held up her badge without turning around and kept walking, because she was wearing scrubs and a hospital ID, and in the controlled chaos of an active federal operation in a medical building, looking like you belonged somewhere was more than half of actually belonging there. She pushed open the door to 308. The room was dim. Window blinds closed, overhead light off. The monitor at bedside showing a flat line because the patient who'd been in here had been evacuated with the rest of the floor. The bed was stripped down to the mattress protector. The IV pole was in the corner. The supply cabinet on the wall was closed. She stood in the doorway. The pharmacy log had placed the last clean-looking dispense record here. This room, this patient, 3 days ago. That patient was now gone. But the room hadn't been cleaned yet. The evacuation had happened too fast, and housekeeping wouldn't have come through in the window between the alarm and the lockdown. She looked at the supply cabinet. It was standard hospital issue, wall-mounted, white laminate, 2 shelves, a lock that required a nursing credential card to open. She used her badge. The lock clicked. She opened it. Standard supplies. Gauze, tape, a box of gloves, 2 bags of normal saline still in packaging. She moved them aside. Behind the saline bags, pushed to the back of the lower shelf, was something that wasn't a hospital supply at all. A sealed plastic case. Hard-sided, gray, the size of a large paperback. No markings. She picked it up. It was lighter than she expected. She turned it over. On the underside, a small biometric reader, the kind that cost more than she made in a month, with a faint blue indicator light showing that it was powered and locked. She put it back on the shelf and took another photograph with her phone. Then she closed the cabinet and stepped back into the doorway. Lena was in the corridor, walking fast from the direction of the stairwell, and she saw Kara, and her expression did several things in quick succession: relief, irritation, and then the specific focused attention of someone processing new information. "I told you to stay on 4, she said. "I know." Kara held up her phone. Room 308, supply cabinet, lower shelf behind the saline, biometric case, blue indicator light. Lena stared at her. "It's still locked," Kara said. "Whoever took it from the carrier couldn't open it, so they stored it somewhere they had access to and planned to come back." "How did you know which room?" Pharmacy log. The dispense entry was attached to the patient who was in 308. The entry was faked. It's my credential on the record, and I never performed that dispense. But the room number was real, because whoever faked the entry used an actual room to make it look legitimate, and then they used that same room to hide what they'd taken. She paused. They were using the fake paper trail as cover storage logistics. Same system, 2 functions. Lena looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then she got on her radio. That's it. The next 40 minutes moved in the particular stop-start rhythm of an operation that had hit its evidence phase. The part where everything slowed down because doing it right mattered more than doing it fast. An evidence team arrived on 3. The supply cabinet was photographed, documented, the chain of custody established before anyone touched the case. Kara gave a formal recorded statement about how she'd accessed the cabinet and what she'd found, standing in the corridor with an agent she hadn't met before who had a digital recorder, in the deliberate, unhurried manner of someone who understood that these words were going to matter in a courtroom. She told the truth. All of it. The pharmacy log, the credential entries, how she'd identified the room, what she'd seen when she opened the cabinet. The agent asked if she'd touched the case. "I picked it up and turned it over," she said. "Then I put it back and didn't touch it again." "What made you put it back?" She thought about it. "Because finding it was the important thing. What happened to it after that wasn't mine to decide." He wrote something down. She didn't ask what. Gaines had been moved to a secure vehicle in the parking lot. She knew this from fragments of radio traffic, and from the fact that when she came back downstairs eventually, his administrative office on the main floor had federal tape across the door and 2 agents inside working through the filing system. She walked past it and made herself not slow down to look. Drummond was at the main nursing station when she came back to the ER level, and the moment he saw her, he came toward her with the expression of a man who had been waiting to do something uncomfortable and had decided to stop putting it off. "My office," he said. She followed him. He didn't sit down this time. He stood with his back to his desk, and his arms at his sides, and looked at her with the expression of someone who had spent the last several hours being told things that were revising his understanding of the last several weeks. "The federal agents briefed me," he said. "Okay, about Gaines, about the pharmacy diversion, about the patient from yesterday and what he is and what he was doing." He stopped. "And about what they found in the pharmacy log, the entries under your credential. I know about those. They were fabricated." "Yes. Someone with administrative access built a record that made it look like you were involved." His jaw moved. "For 2 weeks, before you even knew anything was happening." "Yes." He looked at the wall to the left of her, not at her, and she recognized the specific discomfort of a man reconsidering something at the root level. "The written warning I gave you yesterday." "It stands," she said. "You said so, and you were right. I did go outside protocol. You saved a federal operative's life. I also didn't follow chain of command. Both things are true." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not fully resolved, still working itself out. "The warning will be withdrawn," he said. "The documentation will reflect that the circumstances—" "Dr. Drummond," she kept her voice even, "I appreciate that, but I need to ask you something first." He waited. "When Gaines called you this morning, before 7:30, he asked about me by name." "Yes." "What exactly did he ask?" Drummond's expression tightened. "He asked whether you were scheduled today, whether you'd accessed any administrative systems, whether there had been any other contact with the patient from yesterday." A pause. "And whether I thought you were a problem." "What did you tell him?" A longer pause. "I told him you were an observant nurse who didn't always follow procedure." He looked at the floor for a moment. "I told him I was handling it." She absorbed that. "That was probably the answer he needed to hear," she said. "That you were handling me internally, that I wasn't a threat that required external action." He understood what she was telling him. She could see it move across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition that he'd been used in a way he hadn't seen coming, that his institutional management of her had served someone else's operational need without his knowledge. "I didn't know what he was," Drummond said. "I know," she said. "Neither did anyone else." He nodded once. There was something in the nod that was more than acknowledgement, something that looked around the edges, like the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. "Go home tonight," he said. "Get some sleep. We'll sort the paperwork tomorrow." She went. She didn't go to the motel. She went to her actual apartment, a one-bedroom in a complex on the west side of Talcott that had been cheap enough for a first-year nurse's salary and close enough to the hospital that she could bike on good days. And she took a shower and ate a bowl of cereal standing over the kitchen sink and sat on her couch in the particular blank aftermath of too much adrenaline and not enough sleep. Her phone had 14 unread messages. Danny, 6 times. Her mother twice. A group thread she'd been ignoring. Lena Marsh once. Sent 40 minutes ago. "We need to talk tomorrow. There's more. Get some rest tonight." She texted Danny. "I'm okay. I'll explain everything soon. Don't call tonight. I need to sleep." He texted back within 30 seconds. "I've been going insane all day." "I know. I'm sorry. Tomorrow." She slept 9 hours, which she hadn't done since before nursing school. And when she woke up, it was light outside, and her phone was showing 7:42 a.m., and a missed call from Lena at 7:15. She called back. "There's something we found overnight," Lena said. "I need you in here." "The hospital?" "Federal field office. I'll send you the address." The field office was in a low commercial building on the north side of Talcott that had no signage and a parking lot that was fuller than it looked like it should be for a building with no signage. Lena met her at the door and walked her through a corridor to a conference room that had a long table, several chairs, and Soren Dial at the far end with a laptop and an expression she couldn't read. There were 2 other people in the room she hadn't seen before. A woman in a jacket that said DEA on the back in yellow letters, and a man in a suit who had federal prosecutor written all over him in the way that certain people carry their professional gravity in how they hold their shoulders. Kara sat down. "Roy Gaines has been talking," Dial said. "He didn't say good morning. He set his hands flat on the table. Since about 2 a.m. He He requested counsel and then fired counsel and then started talking anyway, which his second counsel is currently very unhappy about. People do surprising things when they realize how deep the hole they're standing in actually is. How deep is it? Kara asked. The diversion network spans 4 states. Harlan Ridge was the primary source, but there are 2 other hospitals in the distribution chain. The operation has been running for 22 months, not 14. The first 8 months are in the records that the biometric case is carrying. That's why it was separated, because it covers the startup phase before Gaines got fully embedded in the protection layer. Dial looked at her steadily. And there are 2 individuals within Harlan Ridge's medical staff who were direct participants, not just Gaines. Asimiki spelt Diklanpirsan. She felt something shift in her chest. Medical staff? Yes. How senior? Dial looked at Lena. Lena said, one of them has been at the hospital for 8 years. She has credentials across pharmacy, surgical recovery, and nursing administration. Patrice Holt. Kara didn't say the name. She didn't have to. The other, Dial continued, is a physician. 3-year appointment. He's been handling the dispense authorization layer, signing off on overages that looked like normal surgical variants. She looked at the table. She thought about the 9 days of small moments that were reorganizing themselves in her memory. Things she'd filed away as the normal friction of being new somewhere, being watched, being tested, and that were now showing their actual shape from a different angle. The credential entry is in the pharmacy log, she said, under my ID. Patrice Holt's terminal access cross-referenced with your schedule, Dial said. She had read access to your credential for medication documentation cross-checks. Standard nursing administration. She used it to make entries during windows when you were physically in the building but not in the pharmacy system. She told me to be careful, Kara said. 3 days ago. Drummond doesn't forget. She paused. She was warning me away. Or monitoring how much you'd been told, Lena said. Both, Kara said. She wanted me scared enough to stay small and also wanted to know if I'd become a problem. She thought about it. When I came back in yesterday morning after the motel, she was at the station. She looked at me and didn't say anything. She made a call at 8:03 a.m., Dial said, 12 minutes after you arrived, to the same external number that Gaines had been using. That was the call that had brought the man with the fake badge. The call that had nearly gotten her collected in a hospital hallway. She sat with that for a moment. The physician, she said. We're not releasing that name until we have him in custody, Dial said. He left the hospital yesterday during the evacuation. We have people looking. I might be able to help with that. Every face in the room turned to her. The evacuation, she said slowly. The PA announcement, Gaines ran it. But the physician would have known the real reason for the alarm. Not gas sensor malfunction, but federal activity on 4, which means he would have known he needed to move and not come back. She pulled out her phone. His exit would be in the badge log. And if he's been careful, if he's been in this operation for 3 years, he'd have a secondary exit route that didn't go through the main parking lot. She looked at Dial. Can I access the badge log from here? He slid a laptop toward her. She pulled up the log remotely through her hospital credentials, sorted by time, filtered for physician badges during the evacuation window, and cross-referenced against the surgical roster she had memorized because she'd been cross-rotated to surgical recovery, and she'd learned the schedule the same way she learned everything, by paying attention to what was in front of her. 4 physicians had badged out between the alarm and the lockdown. 3 of them she could account for. She'd seen them in the main corridor during the evacuation, had heard their voices, had registered their presence the way she registered everything, automatically, without knowing she was doing it. The 4th badge exit was through the pharmacy loading dock. She looked at the name. She looked at it for a long moment. Dr. Alejandro Va, the man who had listened to her in the trauma bay, the man who had walked to the stretcher and seen what she saw and gone to Drummond instead of back to her, the man she'd trusted because he'd helped, without examining carefully enough what helping had meant to him or why. She turned the laptop to face Dial. He read it. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved to his phone. Pharmacy loading dock, she said. It connects to the service alley that runs along the east side of the building. That comes out on Creston Avenue, which is 3 blocks from the Route 9 interchange. She paused. If he had a vehicle staged, he's been gone for 22 hours. Dial was already on the phone. She heard him relaying the name, the exit route, the time, The vehicle registration pulled from hospital HR records. The DEA agent in the corner stood up and left the room. The federal prosecutor had been writing something on a legal pad, and he stopped and looked up at Kara with the neutral, assessing expression of someone revising a prior conclusion. "How did you identify the exit route?" he asked. "I bike to work," she said. "I know every vehicle exit from that building because I have to avoid getting hit by them. The loading dock goes to Creston, and Creston is the fastest route to the highway from the east side of the building." She paused. "And Dr. Voss drives a blue Jeep Wrangler. I've seen it in the east lot every morning for 3 weeks." The prosecutor wrote something else. Lena, who had been standing against the wall through all of this, spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. "We're going to need you to be available, probably for several days. There will be formal statements, interviews, documentation review." She looked at Kara directly. "You understand that your credential entries in the pharmacy log are going to be part of the evidentiary record. We'll be demonstrating that they were fabricated, but they'll be part of the record." "I know. Your name is going to be visible." "I know that too. Are you all right with that?" Kara thought about the motel room on Route 9, the sandwich she'd eaten while the hospital evacuated around her, the way her legs had shaken against the nursing station desk after Gaines had been taken out of the room, and how she'd let them shake because there was no one she needed to perform for. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right with it." She went back to the hospital that afternoon, not because she was scheduled, not because anyone had asked her to. She went because it was her floor and her patients and her job, and absence felt like retreat, and she was done retreating. Drummond was at the station when she came in. He looked at her and didn't say anything, just stepped slightly to the side to make room at the desk, which, from Felix Drummond, was approximately the equivalent of rolling out a red carpet. Marcus Webb passed her in the corridor at 3 p.m. and said, "Heard it was a long night." "2 nights," she said. "Voss?" he said. She nodded. He shook his head slowly. "I thought—" He stopped. "I mean, he seemed—" "Yeah," she said. "I'm sorry for the stuff I didn't say earlier, when you were flagging the patient and I—" "Webb?" He stopped. "You sent me after the pharmacy audit trail." She looked at him. "Indirectly. You told me about the badge in the break room, and you told me about the biomedical compliance question, and that's what put me on the right path, so—" She let that sit for a second. "You helped." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know I was helping." "Most of the time you don't," she said. "Come on, there are actual patients to look after." He followed her down the corridor. She was at the nursing station reviewing charts an hour later when Patrice Holt was walked out of the building. Not loudly, not dramatically. 2 federal agents on either side and Patrice in her uniform, still, composed, carrying herself with the posture of a woman who had made decisions and was living in their consequences, and was not going to give the corridor the satisfaction of watching her crumble. She didn't look at Kara as she passed. Kara watched her go. She felt something that wasn't satisfaction and wasn't grief. Something older and less clean than either of those. The complicated weight of being right about the wrong thing. The floor went quiet in the way that floors went quiet when something significant had just happened in them. Then a monitor alarmed in Bay 2, and Kara closed the chart she was reviewing and went to see what it needed. It was late evening, almost the end of her shift, when Lena came back. She found Kara in the medication room working through the end-of-shift documentation, and she stood in the doorway and waited until Kara looked up. "Voss," Kara said. "Apprehended in Albuquerque at 4:17 this afternoon." Lena's voice was even. Vehicle matched. He had personal documents with him, cash, and a bag that suggested he'd planned to be gone longer than a day. Kara nodded. Gaines made his formal statement this afternoon. His attorney was present for this one. Lena came into the room and leaned against the supply shelf. He gave up the full network. The other hospitals, the distribution chain, the financial layer, 17 individuals across 4 states. It's the largest pharmaceutical diversion case in this region in 12 years. She absorbed that number. 17 people, 4 states, 22 months. "The biometric case," she said. "Opened this morning by the agency it was built for. The contents are intact. 22 months of records, which means the full scope of the operation is documented. No gaps." Lena paused. Garrett Moss's operation. 7 months of embedded work and 3 attempts to get out. The case holds start to finish because of what's in that file. And because he survived long enough to hand it off, Kara said. Yes, Lena looked at her. Because of you. The medication room was very quiet. The hospital sounds came through the walls, muffled and constant. The rhythm of the place doing what it did, continuous and indifferent to the events of the last 48 hours. The credential entries, Kara said. My name in the pharmacy log. The DEA forensics team completed the analysis this afternoon. The fabrication is documented and will be formally exculpated in the evidentiary record. Your name will be cleared. Lena paused. Officially. Kara looked at her. But it'll still be in the record. Yes. So anyone who pulls the case file and skims it will see a more thorough read if they look at it right. Lena's voice was careful. Which is why the formal statement matters. The one you gave this morning establishes the context. It won't be easy to misread if someone is actually reading. She tilted her head slightly. Are you worried about it? Kara thought about it honestly. She thought about being 23 and 22 days into her first nursing job and having her credential attached to a drug diversion scheme that spanned 4 states. And she thought about how that looked on the surface before you got past the surface. And she thought about every person in this building who'd had a version of her already written in their head before she opened her mouth. A little, she said. That's fair, Lena said. She finished her documentation. She shut down the terminal. She collected her bag from her locker and changed out of her scrubs and walked toward the exit. And she was almost at the door when the overhead PA clicked on. Not an alarm, not a code. A voice she recognized as the interim administrator, Gaines's second in command, a woman named Dorla Reyes, who'd been fielding the day's institutional chaos with the expression of someone bailing water from a boat she hadn't asked to be on. Attention Harlan Ridge Memorial staff. Due to ongoing administrative review, all pharmacy credential access logs for the past 30 days are being temporarily suspended from internal review pending federal documentation procedures. Staff with questions should contact the nursing supervisor on their floor. Thank you. Clinical, administrative, precisely worded. And buried in the procedural language, Kara heard what it actually said. The records exist, they're being protected, and no one on this floor is going to quietly bury them while we're looking. She pushed through the exit. The parking lot was cold, the desert October finally deciding it was fall, and the sky overhead was the dark, clear blue that came after sunset at altitude, the stars just beginning to emerge at the edges. She was halfway to her car when her phone buzzed. Lena's number. A text, not a call. One more thing you need to know. Gaines gave us the full staff list. Everyone who was paid, everyone who was coerced, everyone who looked the other way in exchange for something. The list has 23 names inside this hospital alone. She stopped walking. 17 of those names are people you've worked beside in the last 3 weeks. She looked at that number. 17. We're not releasing the list until arrests are coordinated. That happens tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. before your shift starts. I wanted you to know before you came back in. She stood in the parking lot with the cold air and the stars and 17 names she didn't have yet. People she'd been working beside. People who had watched her get written up and watched her flagged and watched her nearly get collected in a hospital hallway. And some of them had done nothing because they were uninvolved. And some of them had done nothing because doing nothing was what they'd agreed to. She typed back, "Is Drummond on the list?" The response took 60 seconds. "No," she breathed. "Is Webb?" Another 30 seconds. "No." She put the phone in her pocket. She stood there a moment longer, not moving yet, letting the night settle around her and the full weight of what she was standing in the middle of become something she could carry rather than something that was carrying her. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., 17 people in the building she worked in would be arrested. Tonight, she still didn't know all their names. She got in her car. She turned the key and the engine came on, and the radio came on with it. Mid-song, something with a slow rhythm she didn't recognize. And she sat with her hands on the wheel and looked through the windshield at the hospital building and thought about a man on a stretcher in a hallway whose chest had barely moved, and the 3-second pause between his breaths, and the one word that had cost him almost everything to say. She thought about where that word had led. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, not Lena's. She looked at it. Nurse Novak. "This is Garrett Moss. I'm told you found the case. I'm told you found Gaines, and you found the room, and you found the exit route, and you found the log entry. I'm told you found most of it. She read it twice. I'm also told there's going to be a formal commendation from the agency, submitted to hospital administration, which I understand you may not care about, but I wanted to tell you myself. She waited. You saved my life twice. Once, when you wouldn't let me die in a hallway. Once when you found what I was carrying and made sure it got to the people who needed it. I've been in this work for 11 years, and I have never been pulled out by a nurse on her third week. She almost smiled. Her phone buzzed one more time. Not Moss, not Lena. A number she didn't recognize, area code she didn't know. The text was short. This is the coordinating supervisor for the Southwestern Federal Healthcare Fraud Task Force. We've been briefed on your role in the last 48 hours. We'd like to speak with you about a formal consultation opportunity. At your convenience. No pressure. She looked at it. Read it again. Set the phone face down on the passenger seat. She was 23 years old and 23 days into her first job, and she had a written warning in her personnel file and her name in a federal pharmacy fraud case and a formal consultation offer from a task force she hadn't known existed 48 hours ago. And tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., 17 people in the building behind her were going to be arrested, and she didn't know yet all of their names. She pulled out of the parking lot. She was 3 blocks from the hospital when her radio cut out. Static, then nothing. And in the silence, she heard the sound her car made at low speed on quiet streets. The faint rattle of the cracked rear bumper she kept meaning to fix, the hum of the engine, the specific acoustic signature of a vehicle that had lived a long, useful, unremarkable life. She was at the light on Creston Avenue waiting for green when the phone buzzed again. She shouldn't have looked. She looked. Lena's number. Not a text. A call, and Lena didn't call without reason, and Kara answered it before the second ring. There's a problem, Lena said. She said it the way people said things they'd hoped they wouldn't have to say. The coordinated arrest for tomorrow morning, I just got a text from the task force. I know. That went out too early. That's part of the problem. A short pause. Someone inside the federal coordination loop leaked the arrest timeline. We don't know who yet, but the 17 names on the list, some of them are going to know by morning that the window is closing. The light turned green. Kara didn't move. How many of the 17 are currently in the building? She asked. 11, Lena said. On shift tonight. Yes. Kara looked at the light, looked at the hospital in her rearview mirror. And the patient, she said, Garrett Moss. He's still in 412. Yes. With 2 agents outside the door. Yes, but Novak. Lena's voice shifted, and underneath the professional control was something that sounded like the beginning of something she hadn't wanted to say. One of the 11 on shift tonight has pharmacy override access. If they decide to move against Moss before the arrest can be coordinated, they could get to him through his medication line, Kara said. It came out flat and certain. Without setting off an alarm, without coming near him with anything that reads as a threat. Yes. She put the car in reverse. I'm coming back, she said. Novak, you have 11 people in a building and 2 agents on a door and a patient who survived 3 attempts on his life. I know that floor. She was already pulling a U-turn. I know which lines are running, I know what's in the pharmacy stock, and I know what a medication event looks like when it isn't supposed to be happening. You need someone on the inside who can see it before it happens. She turned the car back toward the hospital. Send me the list. A silence. Lena, send me the list. If you go in there and you see something, I'll call you first, I promise. Another silence. Longer. Her phone buzzed. The list appeared. She looked at it while she drove, which she shouldn't have done, but did, scanning the 17 names, and she got through 8 of them before she reached the parking lot entrance and had to stop looking and look at the road. 8 names. All of them people she'd seen in the last 3 weeks. All of them faces she could place, voices she could identify, movements she'd cataloged and filed away automatically. She parked. She got out. She walked toward the ER entrance, her hospital badge in hand, and she pushed through the door into the light and noise and organized activity of a hospital that didn't know yet what was inside it. She looked at the names on her phone one more time. She looked at the nurse's station. She looked at the person behind it, and she understood, with a cold and complete certainty, that the person currently accessing the medication management terminal, calmly, routinely, in the ordinary course of a night shift, was name number 9 on the list, and they were logged into a patient account. Room 412. She didn't run. Running was what you did when you wanted everyone in the room to know something was wrong. And the one thing she could not afford right now was for the person at that terminal to know they'd been seen. She walked, the same pace she'd used in the corridor 2 days ago when she'd left through the back exit. The pace of someone with somewhere to be, someone doing their job, someone unremarkable. She walked to the supply alcove to the left of the nurse's station and picked up a chart that was sitting in the return rack and opened it and looked at it without reading a single word on the page. Her eyes were on the terminal. Name number 9 on the list was a nurse named Derek Sowell, 44 years old, 9 years at Harlan Ridge, a man she'd mentally cataloged in the first week as competent and unremarkable, the kind of staff member who existed in the background of a department without generating friction or attention. He'd been pleasant to her exactly the number of times that pleasantness was socially required and not once more. She hadn't thought anything of that. She thought something of it now. He was logged into Room 412's medication management record. She watched his hands on the keyboard. He was typing with the unhurried efficiency of someone performing a routine task. And that was the thing that made the cold in her chest worse. Not the urgency of desperation, but the practiced calm of someone who had done this kind of thing before and knew how to do it so it looked like nothing. She needed to know what he was entering. She couldn't see the screen from here. She needed to get closer without getting closer. She put the chart back in the rack, picked up a different one, and walked to the medication prep counter that ran along the wall adjacent to the station. Close enough to the terminal that she could see the screen in her peripheral vision, far enough that she was doing something that made sense for her to be doing there. She looked at the screen. He was in the IV medication order queue for Room 412. Garrett Moss, post-operative day 2, current medication protocol, including the morphine drip she'd noted was running low, the prophylactic antibiotic, the anticoagulant. Standard surgical recovery management. Derek Sowell was adding an entry to the anticoagulant protocol. Not a massive change, not something that would alarm a surface read. He was adjusting the dosage timing, moving the next scheduled dose forward by 2 hours, and increasing the concentration by a margin that was, on its own, within the range of a physician-ordered modification. Except there was no physician order attached to the modification, and an anticoagulant at increased concentration administered to a post-operative patient with a splenic repair and an epidural hematoma repair would create a bleeding risk that would look, on a chart reviewed after the fact, like a surgical complication, like a patient whose recovery had taken a bad turn, like something that happened sometimes in surgical recovery to patients who'd been through significant trauma. It would not look like murder. It would not look like anything except bad luck. She had her phone in her hand and she was already texting Lena. Sowell, nurse's station, 412 medication order, anticoagulant mod, no physician order attached, move now, before she'd finished processing what she was looking at, her fingers doing it while her brain was still catching up. She sent it. She looked at Sowell. He was almost done. The entry was almost complete. In approximately 10 seconds, he would confirm the order and it would go to the pharmacy queue. And from the pharmacy queue, it would go to whoever was running the IV on 4, and Garrett Moss, who had survived being shot and run off a highway and 2 hours of surgery and 3 separate attempts on his life, would die in a hospital bed from what his chart would call a post-operative complication. 10 seconds was not enough time for Lena's team to get from wherever they were to the station. She put the chart down. She walked to the terminal. She stood beside Derek Sowell and said, in a voice that was professionally neutral and completely steady, "You need to cancel that order." He looked at her. For one moment his face did nothing. It stayed in the pleasant, unremarkable configuration she'd cataloged in week 1. Then something shifted behind it, something that recognized what was happening, and his hand moved toward the keyboard to confirm the entry. She put her hand over the keyboard first. Not aggressive, not a grab. She just placed her hand flat on the keys, the way you'd place it on a table to make a point, and she looked at him and said, "There's no physician order. The modification will flag on pharmacy review. And there are federal agents in this building right now who are looking at you specifically." She held his eyes. "Cancel the order." He looked at her hand, looked at her face. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "I have a pretty good idea," she said. "Cancel it." Something in his face moved through several calculations that she could almost follow. What she knew, what she could prove, how fast he could confirm the entry, what happened after that, whether any of it mattered anymore. She watched him run all of it and come out the other side of it in a different place than he'd been when he sat down tonight. His hand moved to the keyboard. He hit cancel. The order disappeared from the queue. Kara stepped back. She became aware, in the half-second of stillness that followed, that her heart was going at approximately twice its resting rate, and her hand was shaking slightly where it had been on the keyboard, and she pressed it flat against her thigh and kept her face from showing any of it. Lena came through the ER entrance 45 seconds later with 2 agents, moving at the pace of people who'd gotten a text that said, "Move now," and had taken it seriously. Derek Sowell was still sitting at the terminal when they reached him. He didn't resist. He stood up when they asked him to stand, and he put his hands where they were indicated, and he looked at Kara once more before they moved him toward the exit, a look that was complicated in a way she didn't try to interpret, because whatever it meant, it belonged to him, and whatever choices had led him here, and she didn't have the bandwidth to carry it for him. He was gone. The nursing station was very still. Lena came back from the exit and stood in front of her and looked at her with an expression that had too many things in it to name easily. "You put your hand on the keyboard," Lena said. "Yes." "I told you to call first." "There wasn't time." "You know that if he'd confirmed the entry before—" "He didn't." Lena looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "He didn't." She put her hand briefly on Kara's shoulder. One squeeze, nothing more. And then she was back on her radio, coordinating, and Kara stood at the nurse's station alone for a moment and breathed. Then she picked up the phone and called the 4th-floor charge line and told them that room 412's medication queue had a canceled entry that needed to be reviewed by the attending before anything was processed tonight. She did it the way she did everything, methodically, completely, without drama. Then she sat down and shook for about 3 minutes, and no one was watching, and that was fine. The arrest began at 5:47 a.m., not 6 as planned. The timeline had been moved up after Derek Sowell's apprehension, because the coordination window was already compromised, and Dial's team had made the call to move before the remaining names could move first. Kara was still in the hospital, technically off shift but unwilling to leave, when the federal vehicles began arriving in the parking lot in the pale gray light before sunrise. She watched from the window of the 4th-floor lounge, a cup of terrible vending machine coffee in her hands, as the building was entered from 4 access points simultaneously. She counted 6 vehicles. She thought about the names on the list, the 9 remaining after Sowell, and she matched them to faces and voices and moments from the last 3 weeks. The particular texture of 23 days of experience reordering itself around information she hadn't had until yesterday. It took 41 minutes. She knew it was done when the vehicles began leaving, and the hospital's morning shift began arriving in the parking lot at the same time. And for a few minutes, the 2 streams intersected. Federal cars going out, nurses and techs coming in, the ordinary rhythm of a hospital morning overlapping with the conclusion of something that had been running underneath it for almost 2 years. By 7:30, 11 of the 17 were in federal custody. The other 6 were in custody by noon of the same day, picked up at their homes or in transit, or in one case, at the airport attempting to check in for a flight to Phoenix with a carry-on bag containing $40,000 in cash. Kara was not there for most of it. She went home at 6:15 and slept for 6 hours, and this time she didn't dream about anything. The formal review process lasted 9 days. She gave 5 separate recorded statements to 3 different agencies. She sat in conference rooms with federal prosecutors and DEA investigators and a forensic accountant who wanted to understand the pharmacy log entries and needed someone to explain nursing credential architecture, which she did for 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon with the strange, detached calm of someone who had found their most useful self in a room full of people who needed specific information delivered clearly. She was not always patient. On day 4, a junior investigator asked her for the 3rd time to walk through the sequence of events in the nurse's station corridor, the moment she'd seen the text on Moss's phone, the decision to stay, the walk to the supply alcove, and she put her pen down and said, "I've answered this question twice. I answered it completely both times. Is there something in my previous answers that was unclear, or are we just establishing consistency? The investigator looked startled. The senior agent across the table looked like she was controlling a smile. After that, the questions were more specific. On day 6, the fabricated pharmacy entries under her credential were formally documented as fraudulent in the Federal Evidentiary Record. She received a written confirmation from the DEA's forensic team, 2 pages, clinical language, which she read once and filed carefully and did not feel the cathartic relief she'd expected to feel. What she felt instead was tired, and then, underneath the tired, something steadier, the particular quiet of a person who knew what had happened and didn't need it written down to know it. But she kept the document anyway. That was human. That was fine. On day 8, the hospital's interim administrator, Dorla Reyes, called her into an office that was still slightly wrong proportioned from having most of its furniture moved to accommodate Gaines's personal effects being cataloged by federal agents. Reyes was 52, efficient, and had the expression of someone who had spent the last week making decisions she hadn't applied for the authority to make. The board met last night, Reyes said. Kara waited. The formal termination of your written warning has been processed. It will be removed from your personnel file entirely, not just noted as resolved. She looked at her paperwork, then at Kara. Your employment status will be reclassified retroactively to good standing from your first day. Any documentation suggesting disciplinary concern will be expunged. Okay, Kara said. Reyes looked at her. Is that all you want to say? What would you like me to say? Most people in your situation would want more than an administrative correction. Reyes leaned back slightly. You nearly had your career ended. You were set up as a fall for a federal fraud scheme. You were physically threatened in this building. All of that is true, Kara said. The board is prepared to discuss a formal recognition, nursing excellence commendation, public acknowledgement. I'd rather be paid for the shifts I worked while this was happening, Kara said. At the rate I was actually hired at, which the pharmacy diversion was apparently affecting through the hospital's financial structure. And I'd like a formal policy review of how temporary credential access is granted during cross-rotation assignments. Because the gap that Patrice Holt used to access my log exists for every cross-rotated nurse in this building, and nobody has addressed it. Reyes stared at her. Can you do both of those things? Kara asked. Yes, Reyes said after a pause. We can do both of those things. Then that's what I'd like. Reyes wrote something on her notepad. Then she looked up again, and for the first time something in her expression moved beyond the administrative register into something more straightforward. You're going to be a very difficult nurse to manage, she said. I've been told, Kara said. Something crossed Reyes's face that might, under different circumstances, have been a smile. Dad, Felix Drummond found her on day 9. Not in his office. In the corridor outside Bay 3, where she was reviewing discharge instructions for a 40-year-old who'd come in with chest pain that had turned out to be a pulled intercostal muscle from moving furniture. Drummond stood at the edge of the corridor with his hands in his coat pockets and waited, which was so far outside his established behavioral range that she noticed it immediately. She finished the discharge instructions. She walked over. I wanted to tell you something, he said. Not in my office. I thought... He stopped. I thought the office gave it the wrong character. She waited. The day you flagged the patient in the corridor, he said, the day I gave you the written warning, I told you that you got lucky. He looked at her directly. I was wrong to say that. It wasn't luck. It was observation and competence and the willingness to act on both of those things without waiting for someone to tell you it was permitted. His jaw tightened. I've been practicing medicine for 23 years. I've told a lot of new nurses to stay in their lane. I don't... He stopped again. I think I've been wrong about that more often than I've been right. It was not a comfortable thing for him to say. She could see that. The physical awkwardness of it, the way he held himself against the discomfort of saying something that required him to be smaller than he usually permitted himself to be. She didn't help him out of it. He'd earned the discomfort, and surviving it was part of what made it mean something. Thank you, she said. That matters. He nodded once. You'll stay on the floor. It was phrased as a statement. She heard the question underneath it. Yes, she said. I'll stay. He went back to wherever he'd come from. She went back to her patients. Garrett Moss was discharged on day 10. He walked out under his own power, which she'd been told was ahead of the typical recovery timeline for the injuries he'd sustained. And she believed it because she'd been monitoring his chart and his vitals every shift, and the rate at which his numbers had improved was frankly slightly annoying in the way that otherwise healthy people in their late 30s sometimes recovered from serious trauma, fast enough to make the nursing management feel almost anticlimactic. He came to the nursing station before he left. She was there. She'd known his discharge time, and she'd made sure she was there, which was not something she would have admitted to anyone, but was true. He was taller than she'd registered in the hospital bed, broader across the shoulders, with the faint permanent tension of someone whose body had learned to be ready for things. His left arm was in a sling from the forearm wound, and his color was still not quite right, the particular pallor of someone whose system was still doing significant repair work. But he was upright and his eyes were clear and present in a way that had nothing to do with medication. He stopped at the station and looked at her. "Nurse Novak," he said. "Mr. Moss." "Garrett." "Garrett." She looked at his chart on the terminal. Out of habit, out of the fact that she was always doing 3 things at once, and looking at charts was one of the default 3. "Your iron levels are still low. You should be eating red meat and leafy greens for the next 6 weeks, not just taking the supplement." "I will," he said. "The sling comes off in 3 weeks, not 2. Don't let anyone talk you out of the full period." "I won't." "And the anticoagulant protocol?" "Kara," he said. She stopped. He looked at her with an expression that was direct and uncomplicated in a way that she found, unexpectedly, slightly difficult to hold. "I know what happened at the nurses' station 2 nights ago," he said. "Lena told me." She didn't say anything. "You put your hand on a keyboard to stop someone from killing me," he said. "Not a weapon, a keyboard. And you talked him out of it." He paused. "I've had people save my life before. It's an occupational reality in my line of work. It doesn't usually—" He seemed to be looking for the honest version of what he wanted to say, which she appreciated. "I've never had someone use the situation itself as the leverage. You just told him the truth. And it worked. It worked because he already knew it was over," she said. "I just reflected that back at him." Maybe. He considered that. Or maybe it worked because you're the kind of person who tells the truth in situations where most people are deciding what story to tell. He shifted the sling slightly. "Either way." She looked at him. "Take care of yourself," she said. "And keep the follow-up appointment in 3 weeks. Don't cancel it because you feel fine." He smiled. It looked better than it had when she'd first seen him try it, when smiling cost him something. Now it just looked like a person smiling. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He left. She watched him go and felt something settle in her that she didn't have a precise clinical term for. The sentencing for Roy Gaines came 4 months later. She read about it on her phone during a lunch break. 14 years, federal, no possibility of parole until 8 years served. The charge sheet was long enough to take several minutes to scroll through. Conspiracy to commit pharmaceutical fraud, obstruction of a federal investigation, accessory to assault, evidence tampering, and 11 counts of specific drug diversion spanning the 22 months of the operation. The judge had noted in the sentencing statement that Gaines had used his position of institutional trust to construct a scheme that had simultaneously endangered patients and undermined a federal investigation, and that the public nature of his role made the breach of that trust particularly severe. Particular severity. 14 years. She put her phone away and ate the rest of her lunch. Patrice Holt pled guilty on the 19th day after the arrests and received 6 years, reduced from a maximum of 11 in exchange for a full cooperation agreement and testimony against Gaines and Voss. The cooperation agreement required her to provide a complete accounting of her role in the credential manipulation, including the specific entries she'd made under Kara's ID. That accounting was filed as part of the formal record. It said, in plain declarative language, that Kara Novak had no involvement in, knowledge of, or culpability for the pharmaceutical diversion scheme. Kara was told about the filing by Lena via text on a Tuesday afternoon in February when she was charting a pediatric intake and half her attention was elsewhere. She read the text. She texted back, "Thank you." She finished the pediatric chart. Alejandro Voss was tried rather than accepting a plea, which surprised no one who had known him, and the trial lasted 3 weeks and ended with a conviction on 7 federal counts, including conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. He received 9 years. During the trial, several months before the verdict, Kara received a subpoena to testify about the badge log and the exit route she'd identified. She testified for 47 minutes. She was not nervous. She told the truth in the same order it had occurred, without embellishment, without performance. She answered the defense attorney's cross-examination with the same precision she'd used in 5 federal interviews and 2 agency depositions. And when the defense attorney asked if it was possible she had misidentified the badge exit, she said, "No. I know the east lot because I parked there. I know that exit because I used it myself 2 days before I found his badge on the log, and I know the Jeep because I saw it every morning for 3 weeks." The defense attorney asked no further questions. After she stepped down, the prosecutor, a compact woman named Sasha Ferreira, who'd been on the case since the beginning, caught her in the courthouse corridor and said simply, "You're good at that." "I just said what happened," Kara said. "Most witnesses say what happened. You said it in a way that couldn't be misunderstood." Ferreira looked at her. "That's a skill." Kara thought about that on the drive back to Talcott. She thought about what it meant to see something and say it clearly and refuse to dress it up or soften it or adjust it for the comfort of whoever was listening. She'd always done it. Her mother had called it bluntness. Her nursing school clinical supervisor had called it directness. Felix Drummond had called it insubordination. Sasha Ferreira called it a skill. Maybe all of them were right, and the thing itself stayed the same, regardless of what people called it. She had been at Harlan Ridge for 8 months when the Southwestern Federal Healthcare Fraud Task Force formally offered her the consulting position. It wasn't what she'd expected. She'd expected, on the rare occasion she'd thought about it, some kind of secondment or advisory role, something structured and official. What Soren Dial described when he called her on a Thursday morning in May was more lateral than that. She would remain a working nurse. Her consulting role would be specifically for cases involving hospital-based fraud schemes where someone with genuine clinical knowledge and floor-level access could identify anomalies that investigators without medical backgrounds consistently missed. "You found the pattern in the pharmacy log in under 30 minutes, Dial said. "Our forensic accountants had the same data for 6 days and didn't see it. They weren't looking at it from the right angle," she said. "They were looking for large discrepancies. The pattern was in the small ones." "That's exactly the point," Dial said. "We need people who know what small looks like when it's wrong." She thought about it for 3 days. She talked to Danny, who said, "You're going to do it anyway. Why are we talking?" She talked to no one else, because there was no one else whose opinion she required. She accepted the position on a Saturday afternoon, in her apartment, over the phone, in the ordinary quiet of her own ordinary life. She told Drummond on Monday. He was quiet for a moment, then, "You'll stay on the floor?" "Part-time," she said. 24 hours a week. The consulting is separate." He nodded, looked at her in that way he'd developed over 8 months. Direct, without the layer of dismissal that had been there at the beginning. "I suppose I should say I'm not surprised." "You can say whatever you want," she said. "I'm not surprised," he said, "and I think you'll be very good at it." She took that home with her and turned it over a few times and decided it was enough. Quote, the day Kara Novak completed her first year at Harlan Ridge Memorial Hospital, she worked a regular shift, 12 hours, 2 critical intakes, a pediatric respiratory case that scared her more than she showed, and 4 routine discharges. She ate lunch in the break room. She charted. She argued briefly with a second-year resident about a potassium protocol and won the argument, and the resident took it better than she expected. At the end of the shift, she changed in the locker room that still had the ghost of a nervous energy in it from that first day. The weight of not knowing if she'd fit, if she was enough, if the thing she'd come here to do was the thing she was actually capable of doing. She knew the answer now, not because everything had gone right. Most of it had gone badly wrong, in the particular way that things went badly wrong when the environment you trusted turned out to be more complicated than it looked. She'd been set up and threatened and nearly gotten someone killed, and had her name attached to a federal fraud case in a way that still made her stomach tighten sometimes when she thought about it too directly. But she'd also held a man's wrist in a hallway and known what she was feeling. She'd stood in front of a terminal and put her hand on a keyboard and told the truth. She'd read a pharmacy log at the right angle and seen the shape of something that 7 other people with more credentials and more years had not seen. She hadn't gotten lucky. She'd looked. That was the whole of it, really. The one thing she kept returning to, the lesson that kept proving itself in different rooms and different crises and different versions of the same basic choice. The world gave you information constantly. Most people looked at what they expected to see and called it seeing. She looked at what was actually there. It wasn't comfortable. It had never been comfortable. Seeing clearly meant you couldn't unsee things, couldn't decide something was fine when it wasn't, couldn't stay in your lane when the lane was the wrong place to be. It made her difficult. It made her exhausting. It made her, as Dorla Reyes had accurately noted, hard to manage. It also kept people alive. She walked out through the ER entrance into the evening, the May air warm and dry off the desert, the sky the particular orange of late sunset at altitude. Her car was in the east lot. She knew the lot, knew every entrance and exit, had known it for 8 months. She thought about a man on a stretcher whose chest had barely moved. She thought about what it cost him to say that one word. She thought about how much a single clear-eyed observation made by someone with no seniority and no leverage and nothing but 22 days of experience and the refusal to look away from what she saw in front of her had actually changed. Not everything. She'd never believed she could change everything. The network had been running for 22 months before she walked into that corridor, and it would have run longer, and someone else somewhere was probably running a version of it right now, and the machinery of systems protecting themselves at the cost of the people inside them didn't stop because one rookie nurse had a clear 30 seconds in a hospital hallway. But Garrett Moss was alive. The case was closed. 17 people were facing federal charges, and she was walking to her car at the end of a shift on the first anniversary of her first nursing job, with a consulting position she hadn't applied for, and a floor she'd earned, and a personnel file that had, where the written warning used to be, nothing. Just her record, just her work, just what she'd actually done. Her phone buzzed. Lena. A text. New case. When you're ready. No rush. She read it. Put her phone in her pocket. Got in her car. She thought about the things people had said to her in the last year. Stay in your lane. You got lucky. You have no authority. You've been fired. You have no idea what you're doing. And she thought about the things that had turned out to be true instead. And she thought the distance between those two categories was the most honest map of the last 12 months she had. Nobody had seen her coming. That had always been the point. She started the car and pulled out of the lot and drove toward Talcott in the orange evening. And the desert opened up on either side of the road the way it always did. Enormous and indifferent and full of information, if you knew how to look. She knew how to look. She always had.